Let me ask you this. What if your architecture is perfect and your influence is zero? Are you an architect or are you just a diagrammer? Today we are going to talk about 10 leadership traits that separate a strategic architect from a tactical technician. Traits that are going to help you coach teams, navigate politics, manage stakeholders, and lead transformation. Because enterprise architecture is not just about designing systems. It's about leading people, shaping decisions, and driving the enterprise forward. This is episode 112. Before we start the 10 traits of leadership within enterprise architecture, I want to remind you that if you're enjoying the videos that I'm publishing on Enterprise Architecture Radio, then don't forget to let YouTube know. Like, share, and subscribe, and comment. And share this video with friends or people you think who would enjoy these videos. Let them know there is something out there that if you're a part of a WhatsApp group, for example, then share the link in the WhatsApp group and let them also know that there's something like out there that could be fun, that could be interesting, and it helps the channel quite a lot. So the first trait is strategic thinking. Now, if you're an enterprise architect or if you're striving to become an enterprise architect, then you have your background in some form of technology. And this is a very interesting question. Why is enterprise architecture a technology field? Now, this is a question that I asked John Zachman when I was doing my Zachman certification, and he said that most of the times it is technology because the skills that are necessary to document the information about the enterprise, to drive change, are very, very specific to engineering. And considering that we've got computer systems everywhere in the organization today, it makes logical sense to have somebody from an engineering background or a technology background to manage this, right? To manage this large enterprise change. And usually that is why enterprise architects have a technical background. But it is not necessary that enterprise architects have to have a technical background. Having said that, there's a very high chance that if you are planning to become an enterprise architect, then you have a technical background. And while that's a good thing, because it gives you certain skills that are necessary, it also plays sometimes as a roadblock or an obstacle on your way. Primarily because we have a systems mindset. We have a mindset of designing systems, of looking at technology, of how technology is integrated. But when you're trying to become an enterprise architect, it becomes mandatory that you start thinking strategically. You start thinking from a end user perspective, an outside in view. And I'm not talking about, like for example, I am in technology infrastructure these days, right? I've been in applications back in the day. And the first thought that comes to my mind when I say an outside in view is, who is my business? And my business is application owners. Application owners come to me asking for technology, asking for infrastructure, and we design an infrastructure system for them and we give it to them. So the first thought is them, but we have to go beyond that. The second thought is the core business, right? Which is, it could be pharmaceutical, for example, or drug development, or manufacturing, or what have you. These are the people who are using those applications, those systems, right? But even that is not really an outside in view. We have to go beyond that. We have to go beyond just the users of systems. We have to go outside the organization as well and think about the overall organization. When you're thinking about strategic perspective, you're thinking about the whole organization and how it is viewed in the industry. So a strategic view is very, very important if you want to become an enterprise architect. And when you think about outcomes, the outcomes are not about outcomes of systems, it's about outcome of the organization and outcome of the business. That's what will help you. And then you think back from there, how do applications enable those outcomes, and how systems enable those outcomes, and how technologies enable those outcomes, and so on and so forth. So that is strategic thinking, and there are a couple of beautiful books about how to build strategic thinking, but most important thing is you need to get out of your mindset of designing systems and building systems and delivering technologies and whatever it is that you've been doing so far. And it's a fun field, trust me. The day I uninstalled VisualStudio.net from my laptop was a sad day in my life because I did enjoy programming a lot. But I came to realize that it's binding me within its borders and I need to get out of it. And sadly, I stopped programming. But over a period of time, you'll come to realize that thinking strategically, thinking about the organization is also very, very interesting. And someday I'll talk about use cases of strategic thinking. But today I'm covering 10 traits. And so we'll look at the second trait. The second trait is stakeholder navigation. And I say this is very important and that is very important. But if you really think about it, all the 10 traits are equally important. Stakeholder navigation. Now, this is about politics. And majority of the people, when they think about politics, they think negatively. Right? I left that organization because there's too much politics. I don't like the politics. I hate the politics. People think that politics is a bad thing and that engaging in politics or engaging in anything political is not required. I will do my work and I will get my results. And I have a very cute and a naive friend of mine who thinks like that. He's a very good engineer and he just does not like politics. But politics is not necessarily a bad thing. Every human being, when you work for an organization, and I've talked about this in one of my previous episodes as well, has their own insecurities, they have their own fears, they have their own ambitions. There's a reason why they come to work, right? And I've often heard that, this database is non-compliant, and I went and talked to the stakeholder and said this database needs to be upgraded, for example. It's a simple decision to make. They just need to upgrade the database. Why wouldn't they do it? But if you look at it from their perspective, they are thinking, my work is getting done. What happens if I upgrade it? What if it impacts my work? What if it impacts my application? What if it impacts my business? So don't touch what's not broken is the point of view that they have. Now, it's your perspective. You're the database owner or database technology service provider, and you are thinking that it's non-compliant. But from the business point of view, they're thinking it's working. I have my data there. It's safe. They don't get into the nitty-gritty of how secure that data is or how safe it is or how vulnerable the data is because it is non-compliant. And you have to understand that every stakeholder has their own point of view and perspective about these things. So ask why. Why is it that the stakeholder is doing whatever it is they're doing? Understand their insecurities, understand their fears, understand their ambitions. Once you start thinking about all these things, you will automatically understand how to navigate the politics. You will automatically understand how to manage stakeholders. Politics might be a dirty word. I call it stakeholder engagement. Understand who your stakeholders are as human beings and not just as professionals, and work with them. The third trait, which is very important, just like the first two traits, is communication clarity. Now, when it comes to communication, there are multiple. The standard thought that comes to mind when you talk about communications is, there is oral communication, there's written communication, and then there is public speaking, and then there is listening, some people would say, right? That listening is also a form of communication, and you need to really understand what the other person is saying and all of that. But that's, I think, very foundational and too fundamental, right? And then when it comes to oral or speaking or oral communication, of course, there are other aspects that you need to look into that, like, for example, the right kind of grammar, the right kind of fluency, the right kind of language, etc., etc. And then I've also heard perspectives about people saying that it's not important. Accents, grammar, all these things are not important as long as you can get the message through. I know quite a few of my stakeholders who have a very thick accent, right? They're from Germany, for example, and they have a very thick German accent, or they're from China and they have a very thick Chinese accent, and that's all right. And I also personally believe that accents are all right. Grammar is also okay. I mean, of course, when I'm teaching my children, I want them to have proper grammar. But when it comes to business, these are less important things. What's more important and what's never talked about usually when it comes to communication is understanding your audience when you're talking to somebody, right? And there is a business audience, and there is a technology audience, and there is a junior audience, and there is a senior audience, and then there are ethnicities and cultures and backgrounds and education levels and age, for example, and experience and objectives also. Who is your audience and what is their objective and what is it that you are going to communicate? So when you speak and when you take all of these into account, right? Your communication becomes more clearer. It becomes easier for the other person to understand. Like, for example, if you go to a business stakeholder and if you go and tell them or give them all the technical jargon about what it is that you're trying to do, the business stakeholder would not be able to engage with you. They'll not be able to align with you, right? They will not be able to understand what you're trying to say because they don't have a technical background. A good example of, let's say that you're trying to explain to a business stakeholder what zero trust is. And to explain that, you say zero trust is like treating your data going through airport security. Everything needs to be checked, everything needs to be aligned, right? That's a simple example of how you can take a technical concept and convert it into. So try to understand who your business is. Try to understand what their perspective is, what their background is, and you'll be able to communicate much better. The fourth trait is team stewardship or team leadership. So when you hire people, hire them for their softer aspects, like for example, curiosity or willingness to learn or willingness to deliver or their interest into upcoming technologies or an open mind, for example. Because technical topics can always be trained. Systems design, systems thinking can always be trained. Anybody can be trained in a technical aspect. But if they don't have the right attitude, if they don't have the right behavior that is needed to align in a particular team, and the team has to have a culture. When you're becoming an enterprise architecture leader, your team is going to have a culture within the larger organization. A culture that enables strategic thinking, for example, or a culture that enables you to learn about new technologies. So when you hire, you try to look for those behavioral traits, and it's easier said than done, trust me. It's not so evident. I mean, you can't see a person's attitude in their resume, or you can't figure out their attitude in an interview, because if you ask them, why is it that you're trying to change your job, right? It's a simple question. And they would say something like, I want to learn more, right? I want to understand more, or I haven't. They'll say anything in the interviews. And these days it's become so easy. You can ask ChatGPT what is the right kind of answer for this kind of a question, and you'll get that answer. So it's a little bit tricky. But you have to look for subliminal aspects. Like, for example, I remember asking one of my candidates. That candidate at that point in time was already heading small data center of a small organization. So he was, from a hierarchical standpoint, already quite high. But he wanted to join at a much more junior role in a larger organization. And I asked him, why are you doing this? You are already in a leadership role, and now you want to come and join a junior role. And he said that I work for a small organization, and if I want to get something done, it just gets done quickly. So there's no fun. I want to face bigger challenges. And that told me something about his attitude. So there are questions, and then there are answers, of course. And some of these answers are textbook answers, but you need to understand and you need to probe a little bit and try to get into the nitty-gritty of why is it that they are trying to do whatever it is that they are trying to do. And they'll tell you, and these things will tell you about their attitude and behavior. And that's a lot more important than technical skills. The fifth trait is accountability and tough calls. Now, when it comes to people leadership, I hear a lot of people say that you need to protect your team. You need to protect your team. But it's overrated. You need to protect your team. There's no doubts about that. I mean, one of the core traits of a leader is to protect your team. Just like the primitive times, in primitive times there used to be one big and strong leader who used to get the major part of the total food that the entire tribe collected, and then the expectation was that when a lion comes, this leader is supposed to run towards the lion to protect him. Simon Sinek says it in a much better way. But you also need to understand that the leader also has a responsibility towards the organization, and it's important that the leader teaches and coaches and trains the team and exposes them to the hazards of the real world so that they learn in a controlled environment, of course. And sometimes if somebody is not being able to do that, then it's also important to take a decisive decision. It's also important to give them the appropriate feedback, coach them, and eventually, if it's not a good fit, then take difficult decisions. And of course, take accountability of your team and of your deliverables and of everything. You need to take accountability that you've made a mistake. because sometimes you hire toxic architects who don't want to coach their team or don't want secret knowledge to go to the rest of the team. In such a situation, it needs to be brought up. Either he needs to be reassigned to some other project where that kind of skill is necessary, or take a difficult decision. The sixth trait of an enterprise architecture leader is influence without authority, and this is something that you will find in most enterprise architecture organizations around the world, across the industries, in any organization that you go for. There was a time when there used to be sovereign enterprise architecture teams where they had complete authority and complete total control over the organization about all organizational decisions, all technical decisions. At least theoretically there was. I haven't really personally seen an organization where there is a sovereign enterprise architecture organization and takes all the decisions and holds all the reins. But theoretically that was assumed and expected. But that doesn't happen. In most organizations, enterprise architecture teams do not have authority. They have certain amount of leverage because they have the ear of the leadership team, but it's not authoritative. It's more from a consulting standpoint. So enterprise architects need to consult with everybody. They need to have influence over people without having the authority to control their decisions. A simple thing such as you want people, and it's a very, very low-level example, but you want everybody to start using the design patterns that you've documented and kept in your design patterns library, right? People may or may not choose to use it. You may want people to start using the architecture repository, for example. See what already exists there, use it, and if you develop something new, then document it within the enterprise architecture repository or work with the enterprise architecture team to document it. These are things that you have to influence. This is extra work, all right? This is not a part of their deliverables at times, right? So you need to have sufficient influence to be able to help them understand why this is an important thing, how it helps them, how it meets their objectives also, without having the authority to control their decisions. The seventh trait is system empathy. Now, system empathy is very similar to stakeholder engagement and politics that I talked about earlier. System empathy is when you design a system, you need to understand that it is people who are going to use those systems. It is people who are going to work with you in building, designing, and ultimately using those systems. And people are illogical, okay? People sometimes don't make sense because they have insecurities. I'm working on a cloud project, for example. I'm trying to migrate as many applications from on-premise data centers to AWS, right? And we came across a group of applications which are hosted in a dedicated hardware, in a cluster of dedicated hardware in one of our data centers, and they just are not willing to move. Now, we have a data classification system. We have availability and confidentiality. Availability is high availability applications usually have disaster recovery and high availability replication. And then we have confidential applications which require special ring fencing and special security measures need to be taken care of, encryption at rest, encryption in motion, all of that. I'm talking to you about this because I want you to understand a classification mechanism for every application. So every application, depending upon what kind of data they are managing, they are classified. High availability, medium availability, low availability, highly confidential, medium confidential, low confidential. I'm not giving you the exact classification, but simplifying it for you to understand. Now, these applications that I'm talking about that would not migrate to AWS are supposedly high availability in the sense that everybody is saying that they are extremely high availability applications. Now, these applications are used by the C-suite, and but they're very simple things like hangar management. So these senior leadership travels by airplane. These are chartered airplanes, and the schedules of these airplanes going and coming, and But the question is, are they as confidential as patient data, right? Are they as confidential as financial data? Are they as confidential as patent data, right? Second thing is, high availability. These applications need to be available at all times. But are they as high available as financially critical applications, for example, that will impact the stock price of the organization and affect millions of dollars or billions of dollars for that matter? So, and on top of that, if they are, let's assume that the business says that yes, they are as critical and as high availability and as confidential. When I study their systems, they are not treated as such, in the sense that they have a dedicated team and a dedicated piece of hardware, but they don't have disaster recovery. They don't have confidentiality, ring fencing, encryption, all of that. They're being managed by a set of people, and they wouldn't want to move to AWS. Second thing, we have moved highly confidential and highly available data to AWS in the past, which are different from this. So I started probing a little bit and tried to understand what is it that they're really doing. Why are they not moving to AWS? And came to realize that it's the insecurities of the people themselves. They have a job. There is a dedicated vendor organization that has been hired to manage these applications, this data. And then there are people who've been hired by that vendor organization to manage these applications and data. So when you go to them or when you go to the business, they have talked to the business and they've talked to the leaders and they've convinced them that they are the best people to manage these applications. Now, they continue to manage the application even when it goes to AWS, but they have these insecurities that they might lose control over it, right? Because right now they have hands-on control over the physical hardware, over the way the applications are installed, over the way everything is set up, right? So sometimes what happens is these insecurities of people encourage them to do things that they don't really, the way they want to do. Now, hardware is a little bit old. It's not completely antiquated, but outdated. There is a good amount of tech debt. There is no disaster recovery. There is no confidentiality ring fencing. And we can potentially propose a much better, cleaner, more secure, more highly available solution to them, but they wouldn't listen. And there's nothing that you can really do about it. And this is what you call systems empathy. You need to understand why people are behaving the way they are behaving. If you don't understand that, if you just focus on a clean solution, a better solution, you may not be able to implement it, right? Systems empathy is a very important part of an architect's profile. It's very, very important. And the 8th trait of an enterprise architecture leader is decision discipline. What that means is there are trade-offs, right? Security versus flexibility, or cost versus security and performance, or vendor lock-in versus speed. If you go with one vendor, you get speed. But if you don't want the vendor lock-in, then you have to compromise on the speed. So how do you decide one against the other? Now, usually there is a decision matrix that you can set up, or a decision tree that you can set up. Most of the decisions can be taken through the decision tree. You go through the decision tree and you take a decision, and that becomes easy, especially if you're delegating the decision making to your team, right? And then there are some design principles that you can document, so you can the team can abide by the design principles while making their decisions. But then there are many decisions that you have to take that are not pre-documented. Not everything can be, systematized, right? In such cases, you need to maintain your decision discipline. What that means is you need to maintain an architectural decisions repository, which will contain all the decisions that you've taken, and why you have taken it, and what was the reasoning behind it. And the reason why you have to maintain this is at a future point in time, if you forget, or if you're not there and somebody needs to understand why you took a certain decision, they can go and refer to the architectural decisions repository to see what are these decisions, why they were taken, what was the reasoning behind it, what are the benefits, what are the downsides, what are the trade-offs, all of that, right? It's more documentation, and I understand that people don't usually like documentation, so it's more work related to that, and it's a little bit boring as well, but it needs to be done, and in the long run it is helpful. Point number 9 is adaptability. There is this quote that in the long run, the species that survives is not the strongest or the fastest or the smartest, but the one that is most adaptable. You need to understand the changing environment and you need to adapt accordingly. For example, artificial intelligence and machine learning is coming. There's a big ruckus about it. When is it coming? Nobody knows. There are predictions about artificial general intelligence, and there are predictions about agentic and so on. And I'm not here to predict. I'm not going to predict. Some people say 5 years, some people say 1 year, some people say 10 years. Some people say the technological singularity is here, and there's a beautiful book about it. Some people say that we are far from there. All the predictions have gone wrong. But I'm not going to go into all of that. What I do see though is that something is coming. We are moving towards artificial intelligence. We are moving towards smarter systems. We are moving towards automation, right? And it's a good idea to align with it. It's a good idea to understand it, to learn it, to master it, to see how to use it. Now, I'm not asking you to start building systems from scratch, right? But it's important that you understand the basics of it, whether you are a business professional or a technology professional or whatever you are. That is adaptability. And I'm not just talking about technology. I'm also talking about business. If you look at the numbers of mergers and acquisitions that are happening in the industry, that has changed and it is increasing. So businesses also need to adapt towards becoming more open-minded when it comes to mergers and acquisitions. Also, you decided that you want to do something, and then midway another decision is taken that no, this is not what we're doing, we need to now pivot and change direction, right? The more adaptable an organization is, an enterprise architect is, a leader is, not just from a system standpoint but also mentally. How mentally adaptable are you? And that also separates you from the oldies. If you really ask me, I'm 50 now, and I try to keep myself as adaptable and as flexible as possible because the new generation is coming, and there are, things that people say about the Gen Z, they are useless, they are this, that, they're too distracted, they have a very short attention span, and they say it in a negative way. But I also think that there are many things that are absolutely amazingly appreciable within the Gen Z. Who knows, maybe the shorter attention span is what will work for them in the future. I mean, we used to focus on longer attention spans and focus and concentration, but the times they are changing, and we don't know how it's going to affect people and affect systems and affect the world, in general. So I try to stay as adaptable as possible. I try to keep an open mind and align myself with the changing times. It's a very important trait. And then finally, last but not the least, the 10th trait of an enterprise architecture leader is multiplication. Multiplication is not multiplication tables, but multiplication of themselves, multiply themselves, build more leaders. In a joking manner, I used to tell my wife many times when this is a couple of years back, and this has always been the case with me. During work hours, I used to take a short break. During lunchtime, I would meet my wife somewhere outside, and we'd go out for a nice lunch, and then she would go to her workplace, and I would come back to my workplace. And at times she would say that, what kind of a job do you do? I mean, you take a nice leisurely 2-hour lunch in the middle of the day on a working day. So I said that I don't get paid for what I do. I get paid for what I know. And I have built a team that is reliable, dependable, and I have absolutely no shame in delegating. Now, it might be seen as a negative trait, but I think that it's important that you build systems and you delegate, because there should come a time when you become redundant. That's the only way that you can move on into the next role, right? If you think about organizational growth, right? Build a team that is so dependable and so reliable and so strong that you are not needed anymore, so that you can go look for greener pastures or other roles and responsibilities or more accountability or probably a promotion or what have you. Build people, build leaders who can replace you. That is multiplication, and that is absolutely necessary when you are an enterprise architecture leader. There's this beautiful book called Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. I'm not going to do a full review of the book right now, but would go through the book. It talks about these very things. It talks about how leaders can amplify or diminish intelligence within their teams, how they can either encourage the team to take more proactive thought and proactive steps and Or they could become an authoritative leader who controls everything and tries to do everything by themselves. And what is the impact of it within the organization? Protecting your team isn't enough. It's important that you protect your team from unnecessary influence and unnecessary political attacks. But it is also important to expose your team to the vagaries of life, to the challenges, to the stakeholders at times, to the leaders at times. Put them ahead, build their confidence. And trust me, that takes you a long way. So that's a wrap for me today. If you're enjoying the videos that I'm publishing on Enterprise Architecture Radio, then don't forget to let YouTube know. Like, share and subscribe and comment and tell me what you think. Enterprise Architecture Radio is not just a podcast. It is a collaboration platform and it is a passion project for me. I talk about these things because I enjoy talking about these things. But more importantly, I would really find it fun if this entire group comes together and we all talk about stuff. So there's a Telegram group and a LinkedIn group and a Discord server, which is completely useless and nobody is using it. They are all called Enterprise Architecture Radio. So look it up and join the community and ask questions and answer questions and help each other out and guide each other, because I'm just one man and I can only answer a few questions. But if all of us get together and if all of us share our experiences with each other, it can be very helpful. It can become a pool of knowledge. It can be some interesting conversations, but most importantly, a ton of fun.